but the idea is, the Dharma is really a living thing. It doesn't really come out in a book or like a dry, cold way. And I think, I'm always experimenting with different pedagogy over the years because often, like the way uh, the Buddhisms that spread in the Himalayas are presented is kind of for Himalayan cultured people. And actually now, I don't know if you know this, they're doing a lot of pedagogy training with both Geshes in the Gelugpa tradition and Khenpos and Kenmos in the Kagyu and Nyingma traditions. Those who study philosophy, those who go through a program of 10 or more years where they're working at that. They're actually like training them how to teach modern people, which is kind of interesting. So it's showing us that the pedagogy that is the monastic pedagogy that works well in a monastic situation, though I think they are trying to update that a little bit. But when we're trying to deepen our Dharma practice, um, it doesn't always. I mean, I personally like it. I like sort of, how do you say it? Sometimes I like an academic approach. Sometimes I don't. But what I found is, I think a lot of us, it can be a struggle on how to actually like embody these teachings, and that just takes time and effort, anyways. So that's just sort of like regardless of how we learn it. But why don't we try to, you know, experiment with learning styles that help us to embody it more? It's kind of what I'm thinking. So I'm always experimenting with that, and it's different every time, and it depends on groups and stuff like that. But yeah, I just wanted to share that. It's sort of like I share that not as any kind of criticism or idea of like I have some special idea of how to present these things today. It's more kind of a something common out to you to like how can these things become more embodied today. So obviously we're going to practice, so that helps a lot when we're practicing. Yeah. Do any of you have experience with the four foundations of mindfulness? Because it's like a very common teaching out there, especially more in the, I would say, Buddhist, where it's in secular kind of Buddhist and Theravada. Does anybody have anybody had teachings on it before? No. Yeah, it's not really taught that much in the Tibetan tradition, because it comes from the Satipatthana Sutra, which is a sutra in the Pali Canon. So, so often, in the Tibetan tradition, they study the Dhamma. There's Tibetan commentaries on the Dhammapada, which is a popular Pali Canon sutra. But Tibetans don't study Pali Canon that much. But the Satipatthana, it does have, so that would like be the basis in the Pali Canon if you want to read that sutra or check it out. But also there are some teachers who teach kind of based on the four foundations of awareness, but more connected to the Mahamudra traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. So that would be more even the Vajrayana. So we're going to kind of do a little bit of a blend, but definitely more approaching the four foundations of awareness from a Vajrayana perspective. Not that I'm teaching Vajrayana explicitly here, right? But Tibetan Buddhism, as probably you all know, because you've been, you sounds like most of you have like about, well, one of you has more, but 4 years or something around that, yeah. And you can see from your own experience and study and practice so far, there's a lot, right? It's a big thing to try. There's a lot to kind of get, and it's confusing, right? And luckily, you all are connected to good teachers and centers, so you have a package to work with. You know what I mean? So I think, do you have a package? You feel like you have a package? You know what I mean by a package? You have like some kind of practice system, something like that, sort of. Okay. Well, that's something to talk about too. If you don't have a package, then we should talk about that. But a package is also kind of, how do you say it? A package is just a package. It's not the thing itself. It's just sort of a way to get in. And as we study and expand our knowledge and experience of the Dharma, um, most of us, we need to start with some kind of simple practice, some kind of simple way in. But after that, we need to expand and really understand, like, what is the purpose? What's going on here? Like, what's unique and what is this asking me to think about or reflect on or get used to. So there's a lot of different um, paradigms in the Dharma. There's a lot of different um, approaches. Actually, when the word Buddhism, I like to start out with this lately, especially for those who are interested in lineage-based Buddhism. Um, Buddhism is a Western word. It's not a word coming from, from Buddhist traditions, right? I think that's kind of obvious once it's mentioned, but we don't think of it like that so much because the world has become so box-like in the sense that, like, in order to approach something, it needs to be boxed and packaged and then presented to us. And again, like I said in the beginning, that's not a bad thing because it's just like Himalayan Buddhism is totally overwhelming if we have no kind of, you know, initial idea of like, hey, this is this principle and this word and blah blah blah, and this is how you meditate, and it's just one form of it. How can we approach it if we can't break it down? So that's important. But boxing it in ultimately also prevents them from seeing what it actually is. And so, I like to refer to Buddhism not as Buddhism, but as the Buddhisms, plural, right? Because there's many Buddhisms. And actually, even within the Himalayan Buddhist traditions, you see lots of different lineages coming in and even like sub lineages within lineages and then interpretations within those lineages. So like just we could just take the Gelugpa tradition as an example, which tends to be a little more monolithic because they had a little more political control. So they but Gelugpa is not monolithic either. It's not there's not like one Gelugpa. There's like a lot of different viewpoints and ways to look at it. And then you have where the lineage comes through. Um, and that's similar for all the other lineages in Tibetan Buddhism. But at the same time, the pretty much most cultures outside of modern US culture, modern North American culture, which kind of has pervaded the world, um, they don't think so black and white. It's not such a black and white, I don't know how to say it. So it's tricky because when we're presented with and we're trying to understand it, we need the black and whites to put it into boxes so we can understand it. But the black and whites also sometimes can prevent us from deepening. You see what I'm saying? So it's a challenging, we have to see wherever we're at, but it is a push and pull with that. Um, so I guess that's to say where I'm leading with this is typically the view or what we call view, tawa in Tibetan is like very important in the Buddhisms, including outside of Tibetan Buddhisms, like all the Buddhisms around the world. Um, and because like I guess Buddhism has been sold to the West through meditation, sometimes there's this sense that meditation is the highest thing. But actually, if the meditation is informed with a view, then it can't really go anywhere. It has limitations. So we're going to talk quite a bit about that. So you have like the four foundations of awareness, which are the practices, but then you have the view of like why we're doing the practice or what we're doing, right? And even within view, you have sub views, right? So I think all of you, having kind of gotten really interested in traditional lineage based Buddhism, I'm guessing you have some experience of like general Buddhist view, right? This idea that we are somehow conditioned by this samsaric mind and body, and this influences how we relate to life, and therefore how we experience happiness and suffering. And the path is to understand that in a deeper way to, for lack of a better word, get out of suffering, or transcend suffering. And that's the basic foundational view of Buddhism, right? But what's so interesting in the Himalayan Buddhisms, this is what I was trying to say, because I'm going to introduce four foundations through Himalayan Buddhist lens. What's interesting with the Himalayan Buddhist views is it's actually three turnings of the wheel, actually more. It's three yanas or three vehicles. Have you all heard this term before, yana? Okay, good. I'll just check because I don't know where your Buddhist education is at. So I'll just check from time to time to see kind of what I need to define and don't need to. So Himalayan Buddhism is actually it's a three yana Buddhism. for the most part, meaning we're integrating these three yanas in various ways into our practice. The Shravakyana, which is, we could say Hinayana too, but sometimes I say Shravakyana because it's a little more respectful term. Shravakyana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana, right? And sometimes we're presented these yanas in a linear way, right? But actually, once we have a foundation of understanding them in a linear way, and we have practice of all three that we're integrating, and practice of all three is deceptive because it doesn't mean a specific meditation practice. It means an understanding of the view of each and then incorporating those into our life, right? And once we have that, then I feel, so once we can incorporate the three yana view, three yanas into our life to some degree, and I'll explain kind of a simpler form of how to do that. Once we can do that, then how do you say it? Then actually they become more circular and less linear, right? So Himalayan Buddhism, as you probably know, because I guess all four of us got attracted to Himalayan or Tibetan Buddhism, maybe through the bells and whistles. You know what I mean by that? It's got a lot of color, a lot of flavor, visualizations, all of it, right? That's the Vajrayana, right? So it's kind of very Vajrayana forward in how it looks, but it's a little deceptive because underneath that there's very strong, deep practices related to the Shravakyana and general Mahayana. Because you're part of an FPMT center, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I don't know how many of you connected with him or know of his teaching. He really emphasized bodhicitta, this practice of bodhicitta, as do many lamas and teachers. And that's really a Mahayana principle that then upgrades when we come into the Vajrayana. So it's not like you get beyond bodhicitta. It's like these things deepen. And the same from the Shravakyana perspective, this idea that we are somewhat stuck and how do you say it? We're in a prison of our own perception, essentially, and that's what we could call samsara. But that prison is not just a mental prison; it sort of has manifested in a physical reality for us. That experience, sorry, that understanding of where we're experiencing dukkha or dissatisfaction, stress, suffering, and then the wish to get out of it, that's part of the Shravakyana view. That's what we kind of incorporate into the foundational parts of Himalayan Buddhism, which is, something to be abandoned, basically, that there's something to be abandoned, to abandon this samsaric state, I guess you could say. And without that, there's no way to embody bodhicitta. So this is one thing I like to share for those of us interested in Mahayana Buddhism. Bodhicitta is really not just about being a nice person. Being a nice or kind person, that's just a basic human value. I wouldn't even call that religious or spiritual necessarily. Bodhicitta really is the understanding around, based on the foundation, right, based on foundational Buddhism, the principle that we're really, there's a stagnation, there's a stuckness, there's a misperception happening. Bodhicitta then expands and into this large space of compassionate awareness that merges with the ultimate truth or the absolute truth over time in meditation, and feeds an altruistic wish to see ourselves and others free, right? And you're all familiar with this idea. We chant it when we chant refuge and bodhicitta, right? And this is a big principle, and we should not diminish this into a humanitarian project. And I know that's a little controversial to say or heavy, but this is really something I'm trying to get across, because, like, it's not to say we shouldn't try to benefit the world and do good things for the world and for ourselves and others and try to be a kind person. That's like just basic human values. What's a shame is I think we're losing those in modern culture. And so it's like we have to talk about bodhicitta, to talk about those, but actually those principles would already be, I don't know, obvious to indigenous, Buddhists. You know what I'm saying? And then, of course, bodhicitta is this larger principle of, like, we're not just trying to make human life better. We're trying to wake up. from the constructs of what it means to be human. And at the same time, the Vajrayana is saying the only way we can do that is to access our very human experience, actually. The richest, most profound, most quickest way is to not abandon working with our human life. So you have these views that kind of seem in contradiction, but actually when we deepen them in our understanding and practice, they don't function in contradiction. Like meaning that the Shravakyana view is, abandon samsara, which includes human life, right? So it's sort of like saying this is all impure, go to the pure, which is, Buddhahood, right? The Mahayana is sort of less concerned with that because it becomes more concerned with the fact that ourselves and others are in samsara. So it's not so much like I need to abandon something. It's more like I need to transform and work with something, right? I need to work with my life. I need to work with others through developing limitless, boundless compassion, boundless love, equanimity, and the view of emptiness. And then that expands even further into the Vajrayana, which is like basically there's nothing to be abandoned. We just need to see that the mind's nature, the mind as it is pure, right? So that's really like very, they seem very contradictory, but yet from the Vajrayana view down, it's all part of it. And again, as some of maybe I'm not sure, is we usually encapsulate in the Mahayana path, we have these three principal aspects of the path of developing renunciation, mind, bodhicitta, and emptiness, right? And really, bodhicitta is the main thing because emptiness is part of bodhicitta. We can separate bodhicitta into relative and absolute. But anyways, so so what I meant by this three yana perspective is we should be developing some sort of renunciation mind through the Sravakana view as a kind of Himalayan Buddhist practitioner who's interested in Vajrayana. We're developing renunciation mind. We're seeing the parts of the way we're interacting with our emotions, our thoughts, our identities, our behaviors. Um, so mostly taking an internal stance first. We need to develop a kind of exhaustion, an internal exhaustion for the ways that we're working that are actually causing dissatisfaction, stress, suffering, etc., that are basically causing the proliferation of dukkha, right? So and I'll describe dukkha a little bit more. You all are familiar with the term dukkha, yes? Yeah, I'll expand on it a little bit more later. Um, so we're kind of we need to come to some sort of a conclusion that certain ways of working with our life are perpetuating our suffering. And that's called renunciation mind, really. Because a lot of people get confused because we have the outward expression of renunciation in sort of monastic life and, yogis and things like that. But actually, those are just outward tools to develop renunciation mind. Either way, it needs to be developed as an internal mind, as an internal decision and um, like I said, an exhaustion with the status quo of samsara, but not as a conceptual idea. That has to be very deep in our bones, right? And then that starts to turn the mind away from activities. And I say activities, and that kind of means sometimes like physical or verbal, but it also means mental activities, right? I mean, for the most part, it's mental, mind activities. And that starts to turn us away. And that's when we start to become really, I would say, yogis and yoginis, because we're working with our mind and we're living our life. Nobody has to know on the outside if we don't want them to. We know how we're working internally on this from this perspective of an exhaustion with the status quo of how we're relating to ourselves, right? So the four foundations are ways to engage that initially, right? They're practices to get to know the mind. Because if we don't get to know the mind in its grossness and subtleness, there's no way to develop that exhaustion because we won't see how things are. Though, and probably you're familiar with this. So, though, of course, when we study the Dharma, like you all have heard the Dharma and listened to teachings probably similar to what I'm talking about right now. Um, through that understanding, through understanding the Dharma or listening to it, we gain conviction because it's very logical. If we listen to it and we have a good teacher, that logic kind of inspires us into another belief, a belief that, oh yeah, there is this thing called dukkha. I do experience that. Um, I don't know. We can kind of develop a little bit of taste of renunciation from that because we get inspired because we see this other possibility. And that's an excellent thing, but it's not enough. Not enough. It will not carry us through to deepen it to the point where we start to turn our mind. Sometimes we have these meditations. In the Gelugpa tradition, they call it the lower and medium scopes of the Lam Rim, right? So you all are familiar with the Lam Rim. If you're not, you should get familiar. It's like some of the whole path is basically Lam Rim, except for the tantric path. So in other traditions, they call them the four mind turnings. The where we reflect on the preciousness of human birth, impermanence and death, karma, cause and effect, and then the suffering nature of samsara. And these are conceptual reflections that are meant to turn the mind and to start to develop an experiential connection to what I'm talking about, to renunciation mind, to this exhaustion with the status quo of how we work with ourselves, right? I'm just calling it that because I think when we externalize it too much, it seems like samsara, we can get in this mentality, samsara is out there, and somehow there's this bad thing out there, and it's in the world. And actually, it's not a great, it happened to me. I'm not sure it's happened to you or not, but that we can develop kind of a little bit of a disdain for the world or kind of hatred towards the world. I mean, that's a strong way to put it, but it's sort of like, oh, there's all this garbage out there and all this samsara. No, that perception, that point of view is samsara itself, right? So I found it useful. It has to come back to our own experience in a kind way, and that doesn't mean that we're fundamentally screwed up and we need to somehow remedy that. And that's the Mahayana take. That's where Mahayana gets really interesting because it influences how we work with renunciation mind. Because in Mahayana, especially in what we call the third turning of the wheel of the Buddha, in the first turning, the Buddha taught the Pali Canon. In the second turning, he taught the Prajnaparamita Sutras, right, which are just the most profound teachings on emptiness and non-duality in Buddhism, in word at least. And then in the third turning, there's this teaching on Buddha nature or awakened nature, which is very beautiful and also kind of a little bit. You can find different takes on that. Some take that as literal, some take that as not literal, but sort of pointing to something. But either way, the basic principle of the Buddha nature teachings is that at our fundamental nature, at our essence, we are not screwed up. We are not flawed. And that is a really interesting thing to bring into the renunciation mind teachings. And I find it really helpful because we could kind of come at it with, I'm flawed and I need to become exhausted with where I'm flawed. And then from there, I become unflawed, right? That's actually a kind of more of a Shravakyana, Hinayana way. But when we take the Mahayana perspective, when we're developing bodhicitta, it has to widen out. And I think this perspective that we have Buddha nature, that we have awakened nature, just at the moment, it's either a seed, meaning it needs to be watered and given sun and proper soil to grow, or it's covered. There's two different views on it. It can be covered, or it's simply a seed we need to nourish. And but we have it. That's the point. We have it. And because we have it, we need to become exhausted with that which is obscuring it or not allowing the seed to grow. You see what I'm saying here? You see the difference, right? So then renunciation mind can also be brought in this way of like, I want to nourish and grow my Buddha nature, or I want to uncover it, is another view, mostly in the Kagyu Nyingma lineages. Um, I want to cover it, and therefore I need to engage with the Dharma. I need to engage with my practice. I need to engage with renunciation mind in order to uncover it, right? So either way, we're turning the mind away from something. But it's kind of like, I think there's a big difference in the how we turn it, meaning like, are we turning it thinking there's a lack and we need to become something else? Or are we turning it knowing actually we lack nothing? It's just that we're not perceiving that right now, right? So it sounds like a subtle difference, but when we reflect on it, when we work with it, it's kind of a big difference. So anyways, I'll give a moment. Any thoughts there or questions kind of before we move on? Or?
I like the two ways you're coming at this. Um, uh, yeah, that's all I have to say. I'm understanding it a lot more than yeah. I appreciate this.
Cool. Oh, and the two ways are just so it's good for our learning to also say it back if you can.
The coming through with the Hinayana and the Mahayana and the different ways, it is helping me and um, my ADD. So I appreciate that.
Cool.
Is is what you're talking about is with Hinayana, it's it, it's we're turning, because we're not sure we have it, but with Mahayana is we all have it. We just have to, sort that out. We have to either uncover it or realize it hasn't blossomed yet, but it is there for all of us. Is that?
Yeah. And another way to think of it is like Hinayana really emphasizes that there's something to be abandoned. This is kind of,
Oh, right.
you know, so whenever you're seeing teachings on that, whether it's around like conduct, like vows, like pratimoksha vows, or around just any perspective like that, that's a bit more of a Hinayana flavor because it's saying there's something that needs to be abandoned. It is part of Mahayana too when we abandon things, but it's a little bit more this emphasis on the development of bodhicitta in the Mahayana. I mean, it's a lot more than emphasis. So it's not so much abandon; it's more transform, right? Where Vajrayana and especially these Buddha nature teachings, which are kind of the peak of the Mahayana. Sometimes we think of them as like a bridge to the Vajrayana. There's not really anything to be abandoned. There's just something to recognize, like that along with our misperception and this misperception that is causing suffering, along with that is an underlying nature that sees reality as it is, right? And so it's just different ways to look at it. So we can meditate to become something, or we can meditate to uncover something, right? But again, in the Gelugpa generally, I'm not presenting strictly from Gelug. I present more of a Rime kind of style. But in the Gelugpa, it would be more we meditate to become something. Though Gelugpa Vajrayana, of course, doesn't follow general Vajrayana principles, but Gelug tradition emphasizes a lot of Hinayana principles and Mahayana because it's a monastic. It's primarily emphasizing monasticism, right? The monasticism is a form of abandoning in a good way, right? Because what do you do when you take monastic vows? You abandon physical and verbal causes of suffering, right? And then a lot of monastic vows are social. I call them social, meaning they're things that are related to not disturbing the minds of others or lay people, and they can be cultural sometimes. But the root vows, the essence of the vows, including the root vows of householder or lay vows, those are really around abandoning the causes of suffering. And so this is kind of how we practice as a three yana practitioner in the Himalayan tradition. Outwardly, we want to, engage in conduct that abandons the causes of suffering, meaning through our speech and our body, we abandon the causes of suffering, also with the mind, of course, too. But internally, we're practicing bodhicitta, and bodhicitta not just as the form of the altruistic mind of relative bodhicitta, but also the trying to understand and incorporate teachings on emptiness and meditations on emptiness to see how reality is. That's when bodhicitta actually becomes bodhicitta. So, so that would be the internal practice. And then for people who have empowerments into Vajrayana, different kinds of Vajrayana practices and things like that, secretly they're going to be practicing that view, which is a very radical, like much more radical than people think it is, right? Because it's basically saying Buddhahood is not somewhere in the future. It's not happening somewhere out there. This is Buddhahood right now. And we take on that view. We call that taking the fruition as the path. So that's one way we practice with Vajrayana. Of course, that has its own, I don't know how you say it, like not linear, but gradual path. But we kind of like, I don't know, in one way, Vajrayana, it has its own gradual path, but it's not as gradual as the other yanas. So yeah. So the reason I say all this is because then we can put the four foundations of awareness into context. I also want to contextualize them within the four seals of Buddhism because these are really interesting. I mean, not just interesting, these are like foundational for the Buddhist path. It's like, what are we doing with the Buddhist path? We're trying to realize the four seals. That's one way to think of it. So, so this is all kind of talking about view, right? So we're still on that, just to recap, right? And I think just to make the case, I think you all are on board, but just to make it even more explicit, without view, the meditation, without the view of meditation, it doesn't mean that much, actually. I mean, now you have like, I don't know, I'm out there in the kind of meditation jungle marketplace, and you just see all kinds of stuff. I'm sure you all have come across it because we all have the ability to shop a lot, and kind of check out different things, which isn't a bad thing in the beginning. Um, but now meditation can really be called anything. I don't know. It really, like anyone can do whatever they want. Anyone can just call themselves a meditation teacher. Anyone can call themselves someone who certifies meditation teachers, which I find even a little more disturbing, right? Because I mean, literally, you can after we finish our session here, go create a website, say I'm now the, I don't know, Utah certifier of mindfulness, and yeah, and then people will pay you money, and you can do that. Not that I'm saying you're going to do that, but I'm just saying it's you know what I mean. So we have to be really careful. Kind of like, I think what's more interesting is meditation is meditation. In Buddhism, we basically have shamatha and vipassana. Those are the two categories of meditation. But and you'll see the four foundations of awareness actually go into, they're both, they're shamatha and vipassana. Um, but I think the more key thing to the Buddhist traditions and lineages is view, right? And this is where we need to do our homework and our reflection a lot to get. And I'm just presenting one version of view. There's many ways into view because view isn't singular. We kind of also have, like I said, the view of each of these yanas. That's kind of what I'm presenting here, because then we can work with the four foundations through each of the yanas. But also, there's like, I don't know how to put it, like, I don't know if some of you have done like deeper emptiness studies, but you have the view of different schools of thought and interpretation of the Buddha's teachings on emptiness. So that can be different views or viewpoints. But view as a whole, I like this way of looking at it either through the Four Seals, which I'll present in a bit, or through these three yana approach. So yeah. Um, so anyways, let's do a little bit of practice because I just wanted to kind of introduce that. And I think the first foundation of awareness, and what I don't want to separate the techniques from the purpose or the view, but I'll kind of go back and forth here. So maybe just to break up the talking, we'll just do some practice and then we'll kind of connect that to view again. The first foundation of awareness is the foundation of or awareness of body, right? And well, let me lay out all four, and then we'll go into the first one. So there's the awareness of body, awareness of feeling or feelings, awareness of mind, and then awareness of phenomena, or what usually is called awareness of dharmas. But dharmas doesn't always mean the teaching; it can also mean phenomena or dhatus. So, so yeah, and usually, you'll find these more like the mindfulness of body, the mindfulness of feeling, mindfulness of feeling, mindfulness of mind, mindfulness of dharmas. I'm just using the word awareness because I think I don't know if you all know, but in traditional Buddhism, it's not just Tibetan Buddhism, it's pretty much all lineages of Buddhism. Mindfulness and awareness are actually two different things, meaning mindfulness is an aspect of awareness. But in secular mindfulness, they have kind of merged awareness into the word mindfulness. So mindfulness usually just represents awareness as well. I like to parse it out for those of us who are a little more, um, what's the right word here? Like we want the detail and we want it, a little bit more from a traditional perspective. So yeah, I'm just that's what I'm calling them the four foundations of awareness. So awareness of the body is pretty straightforward, and I think all of you probably know this because usually the start, at least in the Satipatthana Sutra, is the practice of shamatha of awareness of breath, right? And then that also becomes a vipassana practice, which I'll describe and guide how to do that. So we're just going to start out with shamatha with the breath, basically. And all of you kind of have a basic practice of shamatha, yeah. Um, I also want to say you don't have to use the breath. For me personally, and this is just a little bit out of the scope of what we're doing today, I I've found different kinds of somatic or embodied based awareness practices to be very helpful for me. Um, it's almost like this way in to embodying the Dharma that a lot of us are really needing and missing because so much of the Dharma goes to our head, right? I mean, and no wonder, because I mean, this is the style of Tibetan Buddhist pedagogy. We're just lecturing. So it's kind of like lecture. It's like I call it takeaway Buddhism, takeout Buddhism, where actually the pedagogy is I would be talking for 4 hours and then giving you all the things to do, and then you would go practice. That's kind of more the tradition, which I think is a really nice way. The problem is, as modern people who are non-monastic, we don't have the time to go away and practice that much. So we like to deepen it also in connection with community, which is great. So I like to do a blend of practice and lecture. But what was my point? Oh, so all these somatic practices, embodied awareness practices have helped me a lot to get out of my head and into the experience and in contact with especially the aggregate of form and feeling a little bit more. Because the aggregates, again, from a Hinayana perspective, there's something to be abandoned, but we can get this a little bit misconstrued. Abandon doesn't mean we don't work with them. Actually, we abandon them by going into them, right? So, and we can see this very clearly in the first noble truth of the Buddha, the noble truth of dukkha. Um, so that's another analogy I've been using for our samsaric experience that we'll talk about a little bit later. But I was reflecting on it one day, and there's this sense of like, is Buddhism a path that sort of first establishes that we're in some kind of a prison, you know, and then you got to get out of the prison? But then what's the how? Is there some sort of mechanism where it's like you're in and then you're out? But as I said, as we go through the yanas, we can see eventually there's no in and out. And we're gonna see this in the fourth seal later on, the seal of nirvana is beyond peace. Um, but anyways, kind of getting off track. The So I like this analogy that we need to recognize we're in some kind of a bind, a jam. Um, we're in this samsaric experience, which is the construct of how we're functioning with body and mind right now, and that is a kind of prison. But that's the bad news, right? That's kind of the first noble truth, like a little bit of the bad news. But the good news is that the keys out of the prison cell are in the cell, right? So I like to use this analogy because it gets us working with ourselves sometimes in a different way. The keys aren't outside. There's no guard, there's no warden. There's no one kind of like watching over you, checking you're a good, you know, in this case, girl or person or woman, you know, good girls and boys, right? They're not checking. Um, the key is inside, and so the Dharma teaches us how to look for that key. That's all, right? And so I view this as like these are portals that open for us as we study, reflect, and practice the Dharma, right? And so these four foundations are also like that. So sometimes there's this element because we're going to start with the shamatha element of it, of settling the mind, right? But we settle the mind so we can look. That's all. Like so settling the mind is actually not that interesting at the end of the day. I know it's like very desired because we're all stressed out and we want to be more calm and all that. And calm is good. We need that. If we're stressed, we can't look. I mean, have you ever tried to look for like lost car keys while you're really stressed about it? Horrible, right? But if you're kind of more chill and calm, you just take it piece by piece, there's a chance you might find them, you know? So that's what shamatha is all about, as well as strengthening awareness. We need to strengthen it because there's a lot of subtlety that we need to do in Vipassana meditation, right? So yeah, so we'll work with that for maybe 20 minutes. I'm just gonna go turn on a fan real quick. So like I said, I think most of you know this, but I'll just guide it very lightly and then leave some silence for us to practice. Go ahead and just prepare yourself however you want for about 20 minutes of meditation. And I think here, let's take refuge and generate bodhicitta because I didn't do it at the beginning. And this becomes a way to, um, yeah, connect motivation for why we're meditating. Again, a lot of what I talked about, but now when we chant refuge and bodhicitta, it's just a small package. It's in a small package, but it includes everything I just talked about and more, obviously. Yeah, we can do that together. I'll chant twice in Tibetan and once in English. Sangye chodang sogi chonama Danshu bardu dani kyamsunchi Dagi jinso gi pe sonangi Ola penshir sangye drupar shod Sangye chodang sogi chonama Danshu bardu dani kyamsunchi Dagi jinso gi pe sonangi Ola penshir sangye drupar shod In the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Sangha Assembly, I take refuge until enlightenment. By the merit of practicing the paramitas, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. Again, a small package. Take a moment to reflect on those words. This becomes the why. Why we meditate is for that. Just dropping that into your heart. Of course, as we familiarize ourselves with the concepts of refuge and bodhicitta more, we make them embodied. We drop them into all the deeper intuitions that can arise with that. And just begin by just connecting with your body and breath. Like I said, it doesn't have to be breath, just be sensation or feeling in the body. And there's so many ways to teach and or guide ourselves and or practice this. I find the most simple, helpful way is just be with body and breath. That's it, the best you can. And when you lose body and breath, you just come back. So here we're training the shamatha aspect of just being in the present moment. I'm confident you all have some connection to this, so I don't have to guide it too much. We'll just practice this for about 15 or so more minutes. Just a few things to help serve your practice. Really, in meditation, in Buddhism, we're not trying to get anything. This really helps to let go. Let go of any expectation to get any kind of experience, mood, shift, even relaxation. Be with body and breath very, very simply. Even if that's very momentary, just for a minute or two, you need a little mini break. We don't get any awards for kind of sitting there still while being distracted. So we might as well kind of break the practice up if we need to, meaning in 15 minutes, if you need little mini breaks for 10 or 20 seconds, refresh the practice. All about being able to sustainably connect to this present moment with shamatha, to grow our awareness in relation to it. And so the point of breath, the attention to breath, is only one part of it. We also need to be with the aware of breath. There's a sense of breath body, and there's a sense of the awareness of breath and body. In order to do this, just notice what's being aware of breath and body. And include that. There's a host there, a meditator. Include that in the present moment. Actually, the host is what bears witness to each moment with the breath. We just simply use attention as a way to cultivate awareness of present moment. Breath and body are just simply an anchor. With that advice, really be sustainable and gentle with your practice, but consistent. See if you can rest with awareness. Rest in this moment when we become distracted, coming back to this moment with awareness. And perhaps at this point, a little more spaciousness in the experience. Again, like I said, the primary purpose of shamatha is to settle the mind, to also cultivate awareness. Now we can start to work with the Vipassana aspect of this first foundation. Hopefully you were able to connect with this aware quality of mind, which just simply is an element of watchfulness, part of our mind that is not just paying attention, but knows we're paying attention. Just take a moment to reconnect with that if you need to. If you're having trouble connecting with that, I recommend focus on your anchor. Is that the body, breath, or just the breath? And then take a step back to notice what's knowing the breath. What part of the mind is aware or watchful of breath. And then just be with the watchfulness. From that watchfulness, this style of Vipassana I want to share with many styles, just doing a little bit of a turn. Like instead of just being watchful and being in the present moment, we actually turn that watchfulness to look at body and breath. The look is a little unique here. It's like we are like shining a light and or turning on a camera that's just going to capture the moment by moment experience of body and breath, the moment by moment nature of it. And we don't have to impute its nature. We don't have to think. This is a less conceptual way of Vipassana. We just simply watch the moment by moment experience of breath and body. I recommend doing this in small chunks. So like you may turn the awareness or the aware quality of the mind to bear witness to body and breath for a minute or two, take a break, refresh, do it again for a minute or two. Of course, just like in shamatha practice, if we become distracted within that minute or two, just come back to watching body and breath. And if it's too wide of a scope to say body and breath, choose somewhere, like somewhere specific, somewhere you're feeling body and breath or like a specific part of the body. I like to just kind of watch the body as a whole. Find that right effort between too much laxity and too much intensity. Just right where you're placing the camera of awareness, capturing, you're knowing what it's capturing, but you don't have to think about it. This can take a little bit of practice to start to work with this part of the mind where we actually don't need thinking. Awareness has its own knowing quality. We just simply allow that to happen. Again, reminding there's nothing really special to get. There's just a process to engage in, which is this process of watchfulness and body and breath. I don't know, let yourself enjoy the mystery, let yourself enjoy the surprise. And sometimes we're just enjoying the boredom. Maybe there's not a lot coming up and we're just not quite sure what should be coming up. We're just trying our best. That's great to see that. Just a couple more minutes of practice. So usually at the close of practice, it's good to expand. I mean, I'm a big fan of not closing the eyes during practice for this reason, because we tend to get into a state. Vipassana practice isn't really about a state. It's more about seeing clearly. But anyways, either way, it's good to start to scope out the practice. So you're not letting go of the practice completely. You're just allowing awareness to connect with more and more of your experience. Ideally, it would include all of your experience, but since we're focusing on body and breath, you may just want to start to become aware of other aspects of your mind and senses, definitely opening up all the senses, or I guess we could say open to them. That's it. I think one of the ways I really like to emphasize is like there shouldn't be too much distinction between the meditation phase and the post meditation, meaning more and more we should try to blend them. So there's just this kind of seamless awareness that pervades our life. That could be one of our aspirations, our medium term goals in our practice. Of course, that takes some years of training and awareness, but it's a good aspiration. How many can I carry awareness throughout the day as much as possible? Short moments is a great way to think of that too. It can be for like mini moments, but a lot of mini moments add up to a lot. And then suddenly you realize, oh, it's easy to kind of, let me say, inhabit awareness throughout my day. Okay, well, thanks so much for your practice. How did that go? Any kind of things you want to share from the practice? Questions, comments, anything's really welcome.
Shamatha
I
sometimes.
realized.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please go ahead. No.
I was just noticing my need to prepare my environment before.
Okay.
So, yeah. But
Meaning
so,
you had
yeah,
too many
that was one thing
distractions.
that I didn't do. So that's okay. That was good. It was a good reminder for me. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes if we have that choice, you know what I mean? It's good, right? Because it's sort of we're all beginners here, myself included. So we need to do that. But if you didn't, or you can't, some people can't. Like right now, I have gardeners outside here. It's not my house, but for 3 hours, they're pretty like they're just here making noise and motorcycles and buses. I'm in the middle of the city in Latin America. If you want to challenge your meditation practice, come live in a city in Latin America, pretty much. And I call, or if you really, really want to challenge it, go live in Kathmandu. Um, I call Latin America halfway to Kathmandu. So you can like start in Latin America and then go to Kathmandu. I'm not talking about Kopan Monastery. That's pretty relaxed. I mean, Deepen, like Bodhanath, on the street. Anyways, so my point is sometimes we try to prepare our best, but there's other factors out of our control. Either way, what I would recommend, just advice for all of us, include it in your practice if you can. And I know that's not easy. So that's something aspirational, maybe, right? Like meaning like really hard to include, especially uh, audio distractions, right? Like for me, it's really difficult. Um, but we have to try. We have to try to include them. And how do you include them? Awareness knows sound is happening. That's it. And it's not like something you tell yourself. I mean, maybe initially it is, right? Just as like a coaching thing. Remind yourself of that. But it has to become that awareness is sound is included. Actually, this is why I'm a fan of meditating with our eyes open. In the Tibetan lineages, we mostly meditate with our eyes open. Actually, I haven't seen many Tibetan meditators close their eyes completely. They either meditate with them half open or fully open. And the reason for this is, well, first of all, it really helps with dullness. So it helps with sleepiness. But it also helps with, three things. Sleepiness, like not getting into dullness. Second, we don't get into a state as easily. Because when you meditate, you can get into this like state-like experience. That's actually not so helpful long term. And then third, we're able to incorporate more of our experience. So if we're able to open our eyes and incorporate what we see, we're able to also start to incorporate what we hear, things around us like that. I mean, it's a little different. There's like some physically demanding us, like a baby or pets or whatever. And we need to physically kind of do something. Of course, that's harder to work with. But nonetheless, if it's just sounds or things moving around us, we have to get used to that. And that takes time, but it's a good challenge. Yeah.
Could you
Yeah.
speak just a smidge more when you talk about not getting into a state, what that specifically means?
Well, so in both shamatha and vipassana, we have what's called nyams in Tibetan, Nyam. I mean, it's the transliteration. A nyam can be anything actually, but it's called a meditation experience, meditation experiences, plural. And usually we kind of have like in most meditation texts, they kind of focus on the most positive meditation states we can get trapped in, which are related to bliss, clarity, and non-thought. Which the reason they mention those is because very hardcore meditators can get stuck in those thinking they have realization, right? Because they experience bliss, clarity, or non-thought, and then it can kind of mirror as realization, even though it's not. And a good way to know it's not is it goes away. So it comes and goes. Poof, it's gone. But anyways, there's also all kinds of meditation experiences or nyams, both pleasant and unpleasant. And those can look like what I say by state. I mean, I'm not talking about being here and present. It's sort of like we start to disembody and disengage from what's here and now. And those aren't. Maybe I should be careful here. Some types of Buddhist meditation does kind of how do you say it? Encourage a state a little bit, especially in shamatha, because we go through these like 9 stages of settling the mind, and and some of those you can get into these like very one-pointed states of being, right? And so that can be encouraged sometimes with one-pointedness. But other than that, I think often we can kind of get into these states and then we get of sort of like whether we call it focus or whatever. But in Vipassana, we're not trying to get into a state. We're trying to perceive reality as it is. That's what I'm saying. Like, there's nothing really to see. There's something really more to uncover, right? So we kind of have to unburden ourselves from the idea of getting into some meditation space or state, and so state would be just some kind of experience that's temporary, that's going to prevent us from looking at, because if we're in a state, we might start to like that state. Actually, maybe this is more accurate. Sorry, I'm kind of bouncing around a little bit. Um, a state actually isn't that bad. The problem is if the state feels good, we tend to like get stuck in that, like a meditative state. And then we lose the thirst for just bearing witness to reality as it is. In this case, using the body and breath, right? And so what happens is we miss the magic of bearing witness, because just straight raw vipassana, it's pretty boring actually. So sometimes we get kind of like we want something flashy and we don't want to be bored, so we chase a state, or we get stuck in a state. Does that make sense? I'm not really defining exactly what state is, but I think hopefully a little
No,
clearer.
thank you very much. That helped. I just
Yeah.
was a little confused.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. How did the Vipassana practice go? Like when I'm pretty clear. I'm pretty sure you guys are all familiar with just shamatha and settling the mind, and that's just an ongoing practice for us. But how did the Vipassana go? Was there any challenges with that you experienced, or unclarity? Because it can be challenging to kind of get into like what are we actually doing like that. That can be challenging.
For the first time, I was dealing or focusing more on trying to find which area that I focused. So that was really interesting to see. I liked how you said, noticing the breath within my body and noticing the movements. But then I also was looking at trying to turn whether I wanted to turn my focus or um, focus from, yeah, I just kind of played with that. That was interesting.
Great. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, just a quick comment. That's the way we have to do it. It's kind of like that spirit of experimentation. As long as we're within the general framework of like turning the mind to look at, in this case, body and breath, um, then we have to experiment. Yeah, because it's an odd thing to do. So we kind of experiment with like, how do I do that? And then how do I keep the mind present with shamatha through that? So yeah, and then that's why the shorter moments can be really helpful, because we just sort of look for a minute or two, give ourselves, it's like giving ourselves permission, because we're not trying to find a state. It actually doesn't matter how long you quote unquote stay in the meditation. What matters is what layers and subtlety are you having insight into about the nature of reality, right? That's really where vipassana, the line of vipassana happens.
To kind of mirror a little bit about what Shayla said and what you're talking about now, Scott, I find it really helpful, your reminder that it's okay to essentially microdose the awareness. So I'm not trying to have the awareness too much and then I'm having frustration and other things, or that perfectionism of I'm not being a good meditator. And I find it's helpful for my everyday life, where when I'm off the cushion, as you said at the end of the meditation, where now I can take this into my everyday life because I've actually practiced in microdosing it. It's not like I'm going to have 15 minutes of awareness in a bank line, but I can have 30 seconds. So I found that reminder very helpful.
Awesome. Yeah, you got it. That's exactly it. Yeah. Yeah, maybe to counterbalance just a little bit, that's there are these there is a value to gaining one-pointedness with shamatha practice. I don't practice that way because I kind of do other styles of working with shamatha and vipassana. But I find for most of us, this kind of, centering small moments is just so helpful, because actually the irony is then we can actually elongate it a lot easier because we stop pushing. You know what I mean? So it's like shamatha is always this dance of just the right amount of effort to not lose connection to awareness in the present moment, and just the right amount of relaxation to be settled. And so often the perfectionism, as you mentioned, it leads us to like over efforting. And so I find just breaking up into shorter moments kind of breaks that habit. But awesome. I'm glad you resonated. Yeah.
Sometimes I've talked to my other teacher about it, but with shamatha is sometimes I get, for a while she was sort of working with people about focusing on the breath, and then it was the counting. And that my brain just exploded because I found that I became so fixated on the breath that I couldn't breathe normally. I was, and so I didn't get a lot of support on that. So, I mean, one of the other teachers has sort of talked about that it doesn't have to be just the breath, that you can focus on other things. And sometimes that's, a little easier for me than, and I don't know if that's something that I should push through with, or just say, this feels more comfortable.
Yeah. No, I don't personally work with the breath as an object that much, just because I'm going through the four foundations. Like I said, the first foundation can also just be like the body, like literally like a physical place in the body. It doesn't have to be the breath. But the Buddha taught it as a means, because the breath is kind of always there. It's something that's moving also. But yeah, I personally do what's called shamatha without support, which, we'll do a little bit. Well, I mean, we're kind of moving just more. I mean, I want to be clear here. The rest of today is going to be on Vipassana in relation to the other three foundations, but it's like we have to take shamatha with us, right? You all get that? Okay. Yeah. And so kind of it's a blend of shamatha and Vipassana. But yeah, just on your question, I just personally do shamatha without support, which you only find it in the Gelug tradition, in the Mahamudra tradition of the Gelugpa. So you in those teachings, we have a shamatha without an object, or shamatha without support, whatever you want to call it. And then you find it in the Kagyu lineages of Nyingma, Kagyu lineages of Mahamudra, and also the Nyingma tradition a little bit. But you do find in the Gelug. So I teach that a lot. So you can go check out also, I have lots of content on that on my YouTube channel and website and stuff. And yeah, that works for me personally because once we connect with awareness, it's like we don't necessarily need an object, but for some people, an object is helpful because it's like an anchor to come back to and things like that. But I find, and you know, a majority of people I work with also find this, um, the kind of like over, I don't know how to call this. I just can't think of the right word. It's kind of like the over technifying of something, like too much technique around something can create anxiety and stress and too much effort, right? So what I found helpful was Mahamudra. It's called Mahamudra Shamatha, or Shamatha without support or without an object. I find that more helpful because it actually emphasizes the kind of what we call um, jokom, or rest. Like there's different ways to translate it, but it's sort of like settling meditation or resting meditation. But resting doesn't mean we're checked out. It means we're resting with awareness, right? So I find that more helpful, um, because because again, I'll harken back to what I said at the beginning of today. The language of Himalayan Buddhism was for Himalayan bodied people for the most part, and I guess you could say kind of Indian people as well at that time. And I would just say humans at that time, because as human beings, we've changed a lot very quickly, like in the last 100 or 200 years, right? Especially our nervous systems, just because like our nervous systems, well, sorry, maybe I should say this. Our nervous systems haven't changed that much, but the world around us has, and the speed of life has, in a sense, right? So there's just there's way more information and stimulus we have to deal with on a daily basis than humans ever had, just because of technology and the speed of the modern world. So so in a way, I think our nervous systems are more overwhelmed because the nervous system doesn't evolve as fast as the outer world has, in a sense. And so, how do you say it? Where where there can be this language in Tibetan Buddhism of sort of like how much effort we need to put in, that could be not necessarily the case for modern nervous systems, right? Because we're already quite alert. Almost we're too alert. And we're so alert that we're not alert. You know what I'm saying? Like we're so alert that we're easily distracted because we're actually stressed and overwhelmed. So for a lot of us, we just need to settle. So like a good analogy for this is like a glass of muddy water. And you know, if you're always holding the glass and moving it, even slightly moving it, you know, the water can we can never notice, we can never rest in the limpidity of the water. It's always got, you know, muck in it, and it always looks dirty actually. And for us, that experience is we're always overwhelmed, we're always like burdened by overthinking. We don't know how to get out of that. The nervous system is overactivated. So one method is just putting the glass down, you know. And so obviously this is the challenge with shamatha meditation. When we put the glass down, the water doesn't stop moving right away. It takes a while. And so we often have to keep putting it down. It's like, and also a lot of us just pick it back up again. You know what I mean? So we have to, so I think thinking of shamatha is just putting the glass down again and again and again and again with a lot of patience and openness. Then we emphasize more of the resting aspect. So there's one teaching on shamatha I really like, from one Tibetan Buddhist teacher, Shogun Trungpa Rinpoche. He just said meditation is the practice of learning how to be. And I really like that. It's like it really changes how we think of it. Doesn't make it necessarily easier. It just can change the approach. So yeah, you definitely don't have to use the breath. Sorry, that's a long way to say that.
Well, I think that's a wonderful statement that Trungpa Rinpoche said, because it sort of it is, you know, it takes away that I have to be perfect. I'm not doing it as well as I should be. Oh gosh, now I'm thinking about the fact that I'm not being perfect. Oh crap, I'm screwing it completely up. You know, I'm getting freaked out. And I don't know about you all, but sometimes I'll go into the cushion and it's just the monkey mind is insane. And what I do, which is just because I'm a Gestalt therapist and I do a lot of neurolinguistic programming. I'll just say, okay, right now is not the time. And I get off the cushion just for a while. And sometimes I come back. And that's not always been supported for me because I've sort of been told to push through. But I also don't want to anchor on the cushion that this is, I have to do this and I need to, force myself, no matter how flipped out I am. Sometimes I think I just, maybe because sometimes I can wait and in 30 minutes or whatever, I sit and it's positive. So then I have that positive thing. But I don't know if that's, a thing or not. But
You're
thanks for
asking, like,
sharing.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I think, yeah. I mean, it's definitely never good to like push ourselves into something. Um, but I guess this kind of begs the question. It's like a question about the view too. What we're talking about today. Like, why does shamatha vipassana exist? Does it exist to get good at a practice, or to feel a certain way, or does it exist to get used to the view of the Four Seals, which I haven't mentioned yet? I'm going to mention after a break. So, so yeah, that's like a question, and I think that can change the process a little bit too, because um, if our motivation is to get used to the view of the Four Seals, impermanence, dukkha, emptiness, and nirvana, then yeah, we can be skillful with how we use our time and energy and stuff like that. But often people, I'm not saying you necessarily, right? It's just something to think about. Often people kind of get up and come back to a meditation practice because they don't feel calm enough to do it. But I'm not saying that's you. But actually calmness isn't the goal. So you see how it like changes you know, the what we're trying to get, the motivation based on the view of the Dharma, that changes how we approach the practice. And so, yeah, and I'll let you choose. I have no judgment. I think if you feel that you need that, then do it. You know what I mean? And it's going to create more stress and more binding. You're going to start to hate your meditation cushion. That's not a good thing, obviously. So if it helps to get up and come back and you still enjoy meditating, that's good. If we always need to enjoy meditation, that can become problematic. And I don't hear you saying that. I'm just sort of raising that up. Um, it's sort of like some people only meditate when the sky is blue. You know what I mean? It's sort of like it's not a great idea. But I don't hear you saying that. And then, another thing I'll say is sometimes it's like emphasis. So with the monkey mind, we really need to work on strategies for not fighting the monkey mind. And like you said, kind of like maybe we do need an external buffer or boundary sometimes, but we want to also try to work more internal boundaries with that or internal processes. And one that I really like is just like working with letting the monkey mind just run, because again, this sense of like the monkey mind is bad or we need to stop the monkey mind or remedy it or something like that. This can be very prevalent in meditation teachings, including Buddhist meditation teachings, when actually the monkey mind's like a waterfall. And no, very few people would try to stop a waterfall. You know what I mean? Like if you saw someone trying to stop a waterfall, you would question their sanity, more or less, right? So there's no point in doing that. It's kind of pointless. So instead, what we learn to do is we learn to connect with present moment awareness, as we've been talking about, slowly, and then we let the monkey mind, awareness basically hosts the monkey mind, and then the monkey mind can just run. So the problem isn't the monkey mind. The problem is we get caught in the monkey mind. Another way to think of this is like there's actually not a problem with thought in meditation. Thought is not the enemy, but thinking is the problem. Right? That's where we get caught. We get caught and we go into active thinking. So we just as kind of like a classic shamatha advice is like notice when you're thinking, actively thinking, notice it as distraction and come back to awareness. But But that can turn into a fight with the monkey mind. And there is an internal distinction to have there. You know what I mean? Because it's not the monkey mind, it's getting caught in the monkey mind that we're trying to remedy. And all we need to do that is like re-recognize awareness. To remedy getting caught in by the monkey mind or in it, we just need to re-recognize awareness. So we kind of emphasize the re-recognition as many times as we need and being patient with that. And then allow settling to happen. Another component here, because I didn't really even mention it that much, is often the agitation, it's not in the mind, it's in the body. So this is like a whole nother piece that, today isn't really about that so much, just because I need to get through a lot. But if we could just spend today on the first foundation, because there's a whole set of practices for settling the body. And that's really important too, because often that's when we remedy that, actually, it's not really the thinking or thoughts that's the problem. It's the body is too activated. The energy in the body. Yeah. And that just goes for like the majority of us, because like I said, we live in very speedy circumstances, and even if we don't live in speedy circumstances right now, we did before, and then the nervous system has its own pattern, and and from the Tibetan system, the Tibetan medical system, this is related to the subtle body, and so the subtle body can also get its own pattern, especially what we call the lung or the wind energy, and lung and mind go together. So if we can settle the lung, then we can settle the mind. So there's other practices we can work with to settle the lung. You can find those also just in content online and stuff like that. Yeah, great. I was going to take a break a little while ago, but it's okay. So let's take a break now. Let's take about 20 minutes, or a little less. Let's come back at 1. Hey, back. So there's kind of an uncommon way to connect these 4 foundations of awareness to the 4 seals of Dharma. Have you all heard of the 4 seals before being mentioned today? Or okay, good. For some reason, a lot of people don't know that much about them, even though they're kind of foundational in Buddhism. Um, anyways, you find them in the Theravada lineages under the title. Usually, they're translated as the 3 characteristics or the 3 marks. So if you like Google that, you'll find a bunch of information. And as I already said, these are anicca or impermanence, dukkha, or we'll define dukkha in a moment, and then anatta or not self in the Theravada tradition. In the Mahayana tradition, we have a sutra. It's a very interesting sutra because it's a sutra that was requested by a Naga king. So, do you know what a Naga is? It's a non-human. It's another realm that within the world. Actually, it's technically part of the animal realm, and Nagas, just like the human realm, you can get kind of Nagas who are wonderful Nagas, ones who are malevolent and ones who are benevolent, and then you have also, even though it's part of the animal realm, there can be, bodhisattvas can actually be born anywhere. But even though it's part of the animal realm, they're intelligent. They're actually intelligent beings. Not saying other animals aren't, just saying like in Buddhism, they are limited to a certain degree. So Nagas can actually practice the Dharma, where like for instance, like most other animals can't. They just don't have the ability to fully practice and understand it. So of course, I mean, it doesn't mean they're bad or anything like that. Sometimes animals are more decent than humans, right? But anyways, yeah. So this Naga king requested the Buddha to teach, and then the Buddha taught the 3 characteristics, but in the form of the 4 seals. And so what gets added on in the Mahayana is the seal of nirvana, right? That would be the 4th seal. And then the 3rd seal of anatta or not self upgrades into emptiness. Not self is more the principle of non-duality we find in the Pali Canon, though you do find emptiness teachings in there too. And then you really see this term emptiness more in the Mahayana sutras. So so anyways, the term seal here is related or really similar to like the seal of a king or queen, where or an official, where it's something that stamps or seals reality. It's something that's kind of official or authentic or um, yeah, putting some kind of authentication on like this is how it is, right? And so the four seals of impermanence, dukkha, emptiness, and nirvana, they're actually to be realized. These are the view of what we're trying to get used to. It's like what we're actually trying to see. And in a way, it's sort of interesting, and I think this can come up as a question often for us in the West. Is there are also things we study, like we study we take teachings and listen to the Dharma on impermanence. Often that's how we first encounter in Tibetan Buddhism, right? We encounter teachings on impermanence or teachings on emptiness or teachings on dukkha. And I think this is an interesting point because it's sort of like when we're listening to the Dharma, when we're reading it or studying it and trying to understand these principles, that's not the principle. That's just an understanding of it. It's like an image of it almost. And in a way, it kind of forms into a belief as well. But how I've come to see these is it's sort of like it can look a little paradoxical, but we do need to have a relationship to both the understanding of these, but also we have to realize the understanding is there just to point us into a direction to experience them. And we shouldn't allow the understanding the conceptual understanding to replace the experience, the need for the experience. And we also, I don't think, have to become a believer. This is kind of one of my other controversial things I like to talk about, or let's say provocative. Maybe it's more provocative than controversial. Provocative in the sense that obviously we can see like Buddhism has beliefs, but what does belief really mean within Buddhism? Do we become a Buddhist through belief, or do we become a Buddhist through realizing the path, right? Um, and what's the purpose here? Is the purpose to believe, and that's the kind of end game? I think we could all see no, right? We could all pretty clearly see that. But of course, like anything else, we form our life around concepts. And what is a concept? It's a type of belief, right? So if we expand the word belief, we can start to see just in order to live, we need to believe in something. I mean, everybody believes in something. Um, I think this is kind of the principle of secularism that can be a little bit, I don't know, snooty and arrogant sometimes, where it's sort of like, oh, we're secular, therefore we're higher than belief. No, you believe in secularism, or you believe you're higher than belief. That's a belief. So we can start to see actually part of the bind of samsara is that we have to believe in something. It doesn't have to be a religion, but you see what I'm saying? It's sort of like we're forced to believe reality is a certain way, even to function in reality. And I can just say it in a more straightforward way. It's like we believe a certain type of food is good for us. We believe that, if we want to get somewhere, the best way to do it is through such and such means, or, this highway to that highway and this plane to there. You see what I'm saying? So like we wouldn't normally think of those as beliefs because we say those are facts, but are they? Right? And so this is where the Dharma becomes really useful, is I think we use shamatha and vipassana to look into what is actually factual in our, to life and in life. What is life actually? Maybe is what we're trying to look at. And then of course, because that's a really difficult question, we learn the Dharma and have these like temporary beliefs. All things are impermanent. All things are in the nature of dukkha. All things are empty of true existence. We have these temporary beliefs we take on through studying the Dharma just as a way in, because it's, emptiness is not something obvious to most people. And so we we need to hear some teachings on it. But eventually we need to let go of the belief on emptiness too. Because the belief in emptiness is not emptiness. It's the opposite of emptiness. It's fixation, right? But I want to be careful here because we also have rich traditions of conceptual understanding of the Dharma, which I don't have to say it too much. That's really important, right? But you all see what I'm saying here? It's that this balance, right? So, what was my point? So, through the four foundations, we can tie them to the four seals, and of course, they, we can see all four seals through the four foundations through practicing them. But there is a way to correlate each one to one or the other. So, the first foundation we can correlate to the seal of impermanence. And that I don't want to assume what you noticed in that very short time we meditated on Vipassana. But if we watch the body and breath enough, we're going to notice that it's changing, right? It's changing all the time. And not just the body and breath, but everything around us. And so, like I said, the important thing with Vipassana is we need to see that directly. And impermanence is not as hidden as emptiness. Therefore, that's why I think it's the first seal. It's like the first gateway into reality and how. Let's just put it this way: the first gateway into understanding what life actually is. And it's not a huge lift. Definitely intellectually, conceptually, it's not a hard lift at all, because most people would not argue that things are permanent, right? The problem is, even though we won't argue that it's permanent, we kind of act as if things are permanent. So that shows us we don't have a direct experience of it. And that's why it's important. That's why it's important. We need to look with awareness at life. In this case, we're I guess limiting life to body and breath with the first foundation. So it's kind of an interesting way to think about it. I should have mentioned that in the beginning, because it's really how I like to teach these. The four foundations are looking at life, but it's looking at life through these small pieces of it, because to look at all of life is just too overwhelming for us, right? It's just too much. So we break it down into pieces. So we look at the life of the breath and body, and we bear witness to its impermanent changing nature, but not imputing that as an idea or as a concept. If you need to, you can ask the question, is body and breath permanent or impermanent? And then you look at body and breath. So a question sometimes in this sense isn't a question we answer with the conceptual mind. It's a question we use as a prompt. Like we're prompting awareness to look in a certain way. In a certain way just means like, look, is something changing or not? And then this is kind of the part that is difficult to describe. That is an unfolding experience that will happen in our practice over time, where it's like impermanence is not just something we see and then, okay, I'm done. It's something that deepens into a direct experience that transforms us. That's the point, right? So these seals aren't just a seal saying how it is. It's actually something we need to explore the seal. We need to not only see it once, we need to deepen that into a realization. So typically how we move through the path is through, learning, reflection, and meditation, right? That's kind of the three wheels that's part of traditional Buddhism, especially Himalayan Buddhism. But then we have what those produce, which is understanding, experience, and then realization. So understanding is conceptual, but it's necessary. Experience is direct, but it's not, it comes and goes. We have different little tastes of insight here and there, right? Of seeing clearly, seeing impermanence possibly, but it comes and goes. Where realization is something that's unchanging. It doesn't change. And what is realization in this context? It would be realization of impermanence, realization of emptiness, realization of dukkha. So the second seal, dukkha, we can start to also, and it's not like I already said, I just want to reiterate it. All of these, the four seals apply to all of the four foundations. It's just one way it can be taught is to kind of like focus on one seal per foundation, which is useful, I think. So the second foundation, the foundation of feeling, a feeling tone, this relates to dukkha. And I think for a lot of us, this really should be our main practice. It's really powerful. There's a lot of work to do here. Because as I said, besides impermanence, dukkha is also one of the major doorways into understanding life and, of course, developing renunciation mind. But it's more for understanding life because as we work with dukkha, we start to understand the nature of dukkha, and more importantly, we can actually start to see the interdependent, empty nature of dukkha. Right? Empty doesn't mean non-existent; it means that it's interdependent. It also starts to imply, like, what is dukkha? Is dukkha the thing itself, or is dukkha having to do with our reaction, right? More than anything else. So this is where I find, I mean, of course, the emptiness teachings go deep down a rabbit hole. I personally find dukkha as the gateway that makes it embodied. And because you can kind of do a bunch of mental gymnastics around emptiness. You can't do that with dukkha. There's just it hits a wall pretty quickly, meaning like we can conceptually reflect on dukkha, the three types of dukkha, the dukkha of dukkha, the dukkha of change, and the dukkha of what we call all pervasive dukkha. Those are useful to conceptualize and reflect on and contemplate. Um, but the more, it kind of hits a wall in a sense of like, if that's separate from relating to the dukkha as it's arising in our life, it's sort of like it doesn't do much for us because we need to relate to the dukkha of our life. And the dukkha of our life, unfortunately, is pretty much every moment of our day. So that's sort of like, it is kind of like the bad news. I mean, it's only bad news in that it's kind of a shock for people who think life should be happy or something, like life should be, I don't know, or people who kind of think they get the wrong idea around that and then they say, oh, that's so pessimistic. What about all the joy in life? And then Buddhism is like, yeah, and look at what that joy is. And usually it falls into the second type of dukkha, the dukkha of change, right? So again, we have to also understand why we would want to look in this way. This is, I think, very important. Otherwise, it can become pessimistic, which is we're only looking at dukkha because we're trying to resolve the fundamental confusion of dukkha. That's all. We're not trying to emphasize it. We're not trying to like be the smartest one in the room. You know what I mean? We're not trying to like accept life is suffering so we can be life is suffering. We're accepting and understanding it so we can undo the mechanics of it, essentially, right? So that really ties into the second noble truth and the third noble truth, right? The noble truth of the cause and the noble truth of cessation. Very, very important. And I think there's an incentive here for practitioners where this incentivizes our relationship to wanting to work with our dukkha, right? Because it's hard working with our dukkha because every fiber in our body is saying, "Don't do that." Just to give you an example, how many things came up in your day to day that you resisted and actively got away from, or at least wanted to get away from? At least 10 or 20, right? Probably for me, it's like 50, that I can probably name, well, maybe I can name 20, right? And so that is dukkha in itself. So just the energy of wanting to move away from something or wanting to get something and be closer to it, what we classically call, clinging and aversion, that means there's dukkha. And that also means our relationship to dukkha is a problem, right? And so I'm saying this just to give us different ways to look at it, to incentivize us to start working actively with it. And again, there's so many ways. I really like practices that help us to become intimate and lean into our dukkha. But of course, we're not leaning into all of it at once. That would be totally overwhelming and undoable for most people. We're leaning into the things we can. Like for me, the noise I'm experiencing in this particular Airbnb, I am, it's sort of overwhelming at times, depending on how much coffee I drink, but it's something I can work with. Like every time there's that constriction and agitation in my body and a little bit of anger comes, I lean into that and I feel that. So this is where somatic work really helps. But we could also do that with the second foundation of mindfulness. There's different ways to work with it, with this foundation of feeling, tone, or feeling. One is watching the quality of a feeling, right? So now we're working with sensations, emotions, energy movement, anything that we can classify as a feeling in the body, right? And this, like I said, we can start by bearing witness and just getting to know the qualities of feeling tone. And really there's three categories here. A feeling tone is either pleasurable, like it's something we like. Feeling tone is unpleasurable, a feeling we don't like, or it's neutral. We neither like nor dislike it. It's just sort of in the middle, right? And classically, these three types of feeling tone can also connect with the three types of dukkha. So usually things that are uncomfortable are more in the realm of the dukkha of dukkha, or the suffering of suffering, right? The pain of pain, right? There's something we actively don't like and want to move away from, right? And the things we like are yet in the nature of change, or the dukkha of change. And this is, I find that one to be I mean, we need to do work with the first one too, but I find that the work with the second one to be the slightly more advanced practice, but very useful, because it really gets us into the door of really being quite clear with how profound the Buddhist teachings are. Because the dukkha of change, or the suffering of change, or we say the dissatisfaction of change, dukkha doesn't have really a great translation in English with a single word. That's why I keep using the word dukkha. Because we'll see here, the dukkha of change is when we're experiencing something pleasurable in general, though it could be anything, but let's just say pleasurable for now. And the moment we experience that pleasure is the end of that moment. And it kind of goes on the decline after that. The class, an example you'll see often is like when we sit down and there's that first moment of sitting down and we feel kind of comfortable in the chair. That is the start of needing to get up, right? That's the start of eventually being uncomfortable sitting and needing to stand. And then the moment we stand, that is the start of needing to sit again. So it's a very subtle thing to experience, because, and does this mean it's anti-pleasure? No, it's anti-clinging, right? We're talking about, what is it that creates the suffering mechanism in there? It's that we can't just let that thing change. We experience the disillusion of it, and then we pursue something else in order to rectify that, essentially. That's what I call the hamster wheel of samsara, which is just the daily basis of moving towards what we like. That starts to end. We move towards something else we like. That starts to end. Or something just uncomfortable happens and we're trying to move away from that. And we just bounce like a ping pong ball throughout our day like that. And again, that can sound very heavy, and it kind of is. But this is like, there's a sobriety here that's necessary, because then this can become a very strong motivator for meditation. But we also need to see that directly. And that's what the second foundation helps us to do. Particularly when we're looking at the feeling tone of something that's pleasurable, we're also watching it change, right? And then all pervasive suffering, or pervasive compounding suffering, that relates to neutrality. Because when we're all pervasive suffering, it's not something that explicitly displays itself as painful or pleasurable, or the illusion of pleasure. It simply is just being in the samsaric experience offers or allows the opportunity for suffering to arise. So that's the pervasion element. Some teachers have described it as kind of like a feeling of not being so settled, like a kind of existential angst where we never feel quite settled, right? We always have to move or shift or do something, or you know what I mean? And so that can be related to pervasive suffering as well. Classically, they kind of tie it into the five aggregates, and basically once we have the five aggregates, they're bound to suffer, right? They're bound to experience the other two types of dukkha. But anyway, so that's one way philosophically we relate dukkha to the four foundations of mindfulness. But really, the point here is, I think, on a more experiential level, and I'll guide a meditation so we can kind of, taste that a little bit. It's more the willingness to feel. I was kind of going a little more into philosophy, but the practice is more the practice of allowing ourselves to feel. And this also involves compassion from the Mahayana perspective, because we're also practicing compassionate presence of what's arising on the feeling level, meaning we are present with it, and there's the compassion or willingness to not only be with it, but to kind of break open through it. And this is more of a Mahayana take on this, right? Um, so yeah, so maybe we'll just practice it. Any kind of thoughts or questions on just anything I just said about philosophical stuff? So kind of taking this simple approach again, just take a few moments just to be. And of course, where do feelings arise? They arise in the body. So just be with the body for a few moments. And maybe you can, how do you say it? Like center it around a certain part of the body, maybe starting somewhere more grounding, like the feet or the weight of your body in the seat or your hands, somewhere that's a little bit more grounding and connected to earth. And being just means that, just be with sensation there, be with any feeling tones arising there. Not just as much as you want to or can. You can also isolate it to a certain part of the body if you want. I wouldn't recommend, if you're not used to this kind of practice, I wouldn't recommend like going to the most activated experience in your body. Sometimes when we're really activated, it's like we can't help but go there. But actually try your best to discover our other parts of, the body that aren't activated. Or if you want to be with the activation, go for it. I mean, that's what I do. But I've been doing these kinds of things for a long time. But either way, we're just going to start to bear witness to feeling tone. So we use the awareness as the host, not as an oppressor, not as a kind of judger. The awareness just sort of bears witness. And we feel the feeling tone, the quality of it, its pleasantness, its discomfort, or its neutrality. And as I said, when resistance builds up, this is a sign that we're unable to be with it, or it's difficult to be with it. So we also can be with the resistance. So if resistance builds towards a certain feeling tone, especially an uncomfortable one, be with the resistance. Feel the qualities of that. And the more we can do this in a raw way, the better, just in the sense that by raw, I mean not using the thinking mind, not trying to analyze it, just feeling the feeling, but we're also hosting the feeling with awareness. These two components are really important. If we're not hosting it with awareness, we are the feeling and we're going to proliferate dukkha. If we're hosting it with awareness, we can have insight into the nature of the dukkha arising and the feeling type. Experiment with that. Just remember, the practice here is not to go into the feeling zone to figure it out. The practice is to bear witness to it, but we're adding this Mahayana flavor. We're not bearing witness in a full way. To allow the intimacy with the feeling, but it's contained within awareness. We have to kind of play with that when we're going too much into the feeling zone. We just click into awareness again. When we're becoming cold, we just allow ourselves to feel the feeling. We're neither rejecting the feeling or becoming it. Refresh the practice as much as you need in this process of bearing witness. It's pretty much a non-conceptual way we get to know dukkha. Again, work with the keys. Just a quick reminder, remember to Give yourself space. So we're not trying to figure out a puzzle, we're just bearing witness to our experience. So taking little breaks, doing that in a sustainable way is really helpful, especially if we're experiencing something unpleasant in the feeling world. We have to be very gentle with that. Not trying to fix or conquer anything, we're just bearing witness to it and allowing the feeling to be the feeling. That's the compassionate just in our last few minutes here, experiment a little bit with where you need to scope out and where you can bring a little bit more awareness. So principally, this isn't a practice of cultivating awareness. It kind of assumes we already have some cultivation. And we're just simply bearing witness with awareness. So awareness hosts the feeling tones, and we're knowing them. As I said before, through Vipassana, we're looking at them. I like to turn kind of bearing witness here a little bit more, because it's through bearing witness that we start to sift out the nature of how things are. And again, like, we might not see that right away. We might just see the nature of our habit patterns. That's a very useful thing as well. So as they are, kind of means our habit patterns in the beginning. The underlying nature of how dukkha is arising and changing, sometimes pleasant, sometimes unpleasant, sometimes neutral. We're just noticing that, but intimately. It's not a cold bearing witness. Hopefully we'll also start to see a deeper aspect of impermanence. Our feeling tones are changing a lot. They're not as solid as they appear. This can also start to lead into the third seal of emptiness, interdependent nature of all things. When you're ready, just allowing the meditation to become broader and wider. Again, we want to create the circumstance to bring the meditation into life, not these, fixed boxes. Just moving towards that slowly. How did that go? Usually not so boring. There's a lot coming up for most people. Usually the hard part is
A
we're getting
lot.
stuck in it. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Um, for me, I had a wonderful experience working through actual physical pain, and just pushing back and creating some space and reminding myself that I'm not trying not to get stuck in that and research it, but yeah, push back and then just be just witness. That was pretty cool. And then I decided to move on to emotions,
Uh-huh.
and found out that I'm a retired police officer, and during the 20 years, I learned real quick how to shut off all sorts of things, and I realized there's quite a few things that are still shut off. So then I went on this frantic search party to find it. All the emotions, couldn't find them, and then I realized, wait a second, stop. So I did, I was able to push back and push back and think about it. Yeah, and then push back again and just witness and be okay with that's okay that it's there. This isn't the time to work on that. And so, so that was my little fun. Um,
Cool. That's great. Yeah, there's all kinds of, you're really centering something I think quite useful, which is like, we just work with what comes up, and we're getting used to using awareness in this kind of capacity. And then, things, it's always a surprise, what happens. And if we're not trying to resolve anything, it takes on a very different tone to the practice. Um, to say something kind of more poignant to what you were saying, yeah, for some of us, we we have had to suppress or reject our emotions either through either part of like childhood patterns of like survival or as you pointed out like work I would think that's pretty common for a lot of us because we can't emote, we don't feel comfortable emoting or it's not even allowed in our work and or our work is very intense like I imagine police work is intense where you see let alone whether it's a crime or not. Sometimes you just have to deal with emergency situations, I'm guessing, and those can be quite intense, before other personnel get there. And so, like a doctor, kind of my thinking, like doctors often have that kind of thing too, where they have to shut off their emotions in order to function as a doctor. Um, so yeah, I love how you approached it. Just being with that was not ready to, and like that was what came up. Sometimes we can call that numbness. Not saying that's what you experienced, but yeah, and we just be with the numbness. Numbness is also a feeling. So I don't. Did you? Maybe she froze. Oh yeah, she froze. That's okay. That's a bummer. She didn't hear it. That's okay. Anyways, anyone else? Just while we wait for her to come back.
I found it interesting that it was easier for me to find or feel the feeling tone of dissatisfaction or avoidance versus pleasure.
Mm.
And then it's almost like I was trying to force myself to find something pleasurable so I could be aware of that feeling. But just for me, it was mostly discomfort that was coming up. So I found that very interesting.
Yeah, cool. So you got to work with that.
That's really, and thank you for sharing that. I kind of had for the first time I was sort of stuck in neutral. And so I was kind of looking for, either direction and had to just sort of say, you know, to just examine that it wasn't pleasurable or, displeasure. I was just kind of like, okay. So that was kind of interesting. So it was a similar thing where first I was kind of digging around going, oh shoot, I'm doing it wrong again. So
Totally. Great. I mean, awesome. I love how you guys worked with it. I think that's it. And often the challenge with neutral is it's kind of boring a little bit because we're just kind of sitting. And then, I mean, sometimes in neutral, there can be a lot of subtlety. Also, as I was saying before, sometimes there can be numbness, which actually isn't neutrality. But it depends on the person. So yeah, I was working with kind of neutral. For me, I go kind of like pretty quickly between different things. Usually it's between neutrality and discomfort, uncomfortable feeling tones. Yeah. Sheila, I don't know. Did we get you back? She's back, but
Yes, my internet definitely went down. I apologize.
oh no problem. I don't know what you missed because I was what you heard and what cut out. Uh
I just heard just the last maybe 40 seconds of what you were just saying. So it's okay. I can go back.
okay, cool. Yeah, no, because I made some comments on what you shared because your share was great. It was really, really helpful. Just the idea that either because of childhood survival mechanisms we have to build and or for work, especially like in caring helping professions like you, like doctors, nurses, emergency workers, police workers, it's like that. I can imagine there's so many circumstances you just can't. You got to do. You're there, and they're very intense situations. I'm sure. So anyways, good. So all of what you shared was quite profound. I really appreciate that. So yeah, There's another layer to this. I would highly recommend getting into contact with a practice called the handshake practice, which isn't technically part of the four foundations of mindfulness, but it kind of is. It's kind of like this second foundation. It's by my other main teacher, Soni Rinpoche. But if you just Google handshake meditation or handshake practice, it'll come up. I have things on it too, but you should check him out. He's a wonderful Tibetan Buddhist teacher, and yeah, it's a wonderful practice for working with he calls it the feeling world, and a lot of what you guys were experiencing. I think you would benefit a lot from it. Just kind of a mini flavor of that. So we got about an hour left. Why don't we do another short break, like short, maybe just 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll. Great. Anything just from the break or questions? Time goes fast, huh? Can you all hear me? Oh. Okay. Okay. Yeah, if there's no questions, we're good. Great. So, and by the way, I think you can see this kind of an overview. Four foundations, they're very deep, and there's actually quite a bit to go into. I did a retreat last weekend on them, which was a Friday night and then an all-day Saturday. So, we were able to go more into depth. And even that was pretty short, actually, because you could really just work with one. And kind of what I've noticed for meditators, really the second one is really this one we just covered. There's just a lot of work to do there for us. It's very powerful and transformative too, because like I said, for a lot of us, softening around the dukkha of our life is, it's not therapeutic work. It's a little different than that, but it does have some crossover into kind of some healing work, right? So that's very helpful for Dharma practice if we merge it with our motivation of bodhicitta and our motivation to wake up. So it becomes very powerful because we're not actually waking up through getting rid of our dukkha. We're waking up through recognizing there's something a little more happening. So this is sort of just that, if the status quo is sort of we want to feel better and move away everything that's not doesn't go under the category of feel good, that's going to actually keep us locked into our samsaric prison. But is it about feeling bad? No. So it's like a very subtle distinction here that has to happen through practice. And this kind of leads us into the third seal, which the majority of Buddhism really deals with this seal, or a majority of the Mahayana path is really dealing with the topic of non-duality or emptiness. And so there's kind of many gateways into this. Even the term emptiness, I'm not sure how much exposure the three of you have had to it, but it is a term that often gets misconstrued quite easily, and it needs to be studied. The word is a good word in English. It's a direct translation of the word, shunyata. And shunyata, though Sanskrit has, unlike English, which is more literal, Sanskrit can also be a little more symbolic. So one literal translation of shunyata is emptiness, but shunyata also can have the connotation of infinity. Sometimes there's like a numeric value. Well, not really a value, but zero, like the number zero, can also be a translation of shunyata because it the implications are something that's infinite, beyond the scope of belief, beyond the scope of the conceptual mind, beyond the scope of any kind of fixation. And that's why I bring in the term non-duality, because it adds a layer to what we're talking about here. And so, because the majority of, Buddhist teachings focus on non-duality, obviously I'm not going to be able to go into it that extensively. And, thankfully you can encounter a lot of teachings on it. But this is really at the crux of the matter, because the prison, so to speak, this prison of samsara that we're struggling with, and sort of interpreting through our current, I guess you could say, like bio psychological, I don't know, reality. I mean, what gets really trippy here pretty quickly in Buddhism is sort of, we assume this world is real. We assume that because we have a body, there's some fact to like, oh yeah, this is just what it is. But even though we need to respect physical reality, we call that part of relative truth. We need to respect. We need to respect the relative truth. The relative truth is not the truth. It's not the whole truth. It's just a part of the truth. And so it's easy, especially in kind of today's what I call like religion of science kind of milieu, meaning like, and most of what people take as science, the science of religion, isn't science. It's just sort of scientific materialism. But somehow this has sort of gotten quite crusty and reified in Western culture. I'm not talking about literal science, just talking about more popularism, like what's culturally seen, and of course just through Cartesian philosophy and Cartesian worldview, very more materialistic, more empirical in nature, all of that, more literal. So these are elements of Western culture, I think, even before the United States was established, that influence us. So we have to become aware of them because they also influence how we interact with reality. Because we're trying to conceptualize something that is somehow, oh, there's this thing, emptiness, that's outside of us, that's this big non-dual field. But what it's saying is actually, no, that's what we are, you know? And through not knowing that, we've gotten stuck in this kind of biopsychological room. I know prison is kind of a strong word, but you know what I'm saying. So, so going back to the teachings on Buddha nature, this is another way to describe it. Buddha nature it's a little bit more than you could say. It's kind of like one way to look at it, you could say it's another synonym for emptiness. But Buddha nature also implies um, that not a void-like quality, but more that there is an interdependent nature to that emptiness, right? That it functions. And that's really important here too, because when we're talking about infinity or beyond duality, we're not talking about something that sort of just sits there in a nothingness. It's something that also interacts and is interdependent. So even by the mere fact that we can see interdependence quite clearly, that also proves that things are not fixed or solid or how do you say it, existing as fact in the way that we see them. So so this is all related to this third seal, and this is the seal that liberates us from the prison. Impermanence is a gateway in. Dukkha is the work and then through dukkha, we start to see things are not what they seem, and then we can start to taste emptiness. So actually, impermanence and dukkha can lead to emptiness, by the way, or we can do other work with emptiness itself, studying it, contemplating it, analytical meditation, non-analytical vipassana, right? And in this case, for our day to day, emptiness relates to the third foundation of awareness of mind, in the sense that we can see mind as immaterial. Because now we've been working with, somewhat material, the biology and feeling tone and all that, which is getting a little bit immaterial. But mind itself, which is made of thinking, knowing, awareness, clarity, that is definitely not something solid. It's something, of course, it intersects with our biology and intersects with our brain and nervous system, but it's not the nervous system or brain. Those are just interdependent factors. So, so we could see the thoughts that we take so seriously, the thoughts about ourselves and the world around us and all of that, they're just that. They're just a thought, and when we look at them objectively, we can see that. We can see, oh, the thoughts from yesterday, those are gone. There's those arose and came and arose, and maybe I took them seriously, maybe I didn't. and they're gone. And yet we form our whole life based on thought. It's a very interesting thing to see. I mean, the hard part is to extricate ourselves from that stagnation, but it's not hard to see that we, especially as meditators, that we get so caught, but when we take an objective perspective, we could see what is even a thought, right? So here we start to relate to the interdependent nature of things. And I keep mentioning that because emptiness is interdependence and interdependence is emptiness. They're just two sides of the same coin. And so thoughts arise in relation to other things, right? They arise in relation to memories, energy movement in our body, um, habit patterns we have, as well as the intersection with, you know, outside relationships, people around us, the world around us, even an email or even a letter, even a single letter of the alphabet can trigger thought, right? So, so what we're looking to see when we're working with emptiness meditation is the interdependent nature of things, that things arise based on many different factors and many different relationships. And it's these relationships, they're not devoid of meaning for that reason. It's just sort of like we can recognize that meaning is imputed and it can also function as a mechanism within relationship, right? Like meaning the letter A has a meaning, right? But it only has a meaning in relation to how, sorry, it only has a meaning in relation to what it's in relationship with. I can't think of a way to say that. You see what I'm saying? Like A only has a relationship, only has a meaning in relation to other things. That's what I'm trying to say. It has a relationship to B and C, right? It also has a relationship in a word we're creating, right? Like apple. And then we can take that even further. A itself only has a relationship to the parts of what make up the letter A, the sides, the structure of it, right? So this is like everything in life. Everything only has meaning in relation to what it's contacting or intersecting with, right? And that shows that it doesn't have meaning in and of itself. And I don't mean that in a dark way. I mean that in a way that there's infinite opportunity, right? Because when there's no meaning in and of itself, there's an opportunity of infinity. There's not a fixed sense of reality. So this is positive in the sense that reality is malleable, it's fluid, it's flexible. The problem is we're not flexible with it. And that's the exact root confusion of samsara. No fluidity, there's no dance, there's no flow. And is that the problem with the reality? No, that's the problem with our habitual patterns. Namely our habitual pattern of misperception, right? Or avidya in Sanskrit. And so this is what the Buddha Dharma mainly functions as. This is like, bottom floor, the basement of the prison, realizing, wow, I'm misperceiving all the time. And then of course, that takes some work just to see that, to then work with that and kind of root out those misperceptions. Of course, that's more challenging. But we have to start, and we have to work on it. So therefore we have the seal of emptiness to be realized, which I'm talking about is like emptiness is that infinite possibility in how reality actually is from a Buddhist perspective. That is how our reality is, infinite and interdependent. Yet, are we acknowledging that? Are we flowing with that? Are we able to live with that? Right? And if we're not, what happens is dukkha, right? So there's kind of these interesting perspectives, like we already saw. Through working with dukkha, we can recognize the infinite potential of reality, but also through working with the infinite potential of emptiness as well, and seeing that in our meditation directly, we can work more skillfully with dukkha, ultimately seeing that pain and pleasure are an illusion, only in relation to themselves, right? So this is kind of the magic of the Dharma, but it's also a pretty deep pool, meaning, and not an easy one. And even I would say can be controversial because some of us, we identify so strongly with our pain and adversity, we're unwilling to let it go because it makes up the very fabric of who we think we are. So what this teaching is saying is not that adversity doesn't happen to us. It does. But it's not denying the relative truth, right? What it's saying is that adversity is not personal and it's not fundamental to what we are. And if we, or the opposite, we could say, what's the opposite of adversity? I can't think of a good word to represent that. Fortune? I don't know. Success? I don't know what's a good word. Anyways, my point. You get my point. Both are empty of true existence, right? But both can arise because they're empty of true existence. That's also part of the magic of the relative and absolute truth being in union. So through looking at mind, bearing witness to mind, we can recognize that illusion, which is kind of a magical thing in and of itself, because it's kind of a wild thing to see that the very makeup of the universe can only be experienced or we can only really bear witness to it at its deepest level through going in. Make sense? Right? Like where we can see sort of materialism wants to go out and has this perception there's a findable place. There's going to be a something findable in the outer universe, that a place where we find reality, the makeup of reality. Buddhists have a different perspective. There is no fundamental makeup of reality, and that needs to be discovered. And the only way to discover that is by going in. Right? So with mindfulness of mind, we look at mind. Primarily to start, you might watch mind. You might watch thinking mind. Right? So maybe we're just going to do a quick one because I want to make sure I have time to go into the fourth foundation. But maybe any questions on that, and then we can go into a very short meditation on mindfulness of mind.
Just a quick question. When you were talking about the A, were you trying to talk about parts and whole, and that part of emptiness is, or
but what was that? What were you referring to? Which
you
part?
never mind. I got it.
Oh, okay.
I'm interested in doing this because I've been reading a lot of, stuff on, sutras and books on emptiness, and getting someone to explain how you meditate on that is, people go, well, you adjust, and kind of like a little bit of instruction, please. So thank you.
Oh yeah, no, how you actually, okay, it's a tricky question. You can't
Yeah.
actually literally meditate on emptiness. There's nothing to meditate on.
It's empty.
But
right. Yes.
But we have many. That's why I'm not sure what you heard from others. We have many strategies and techniques of Vipassana. That's what Vipassana meditation is fundamentally. Of Vipassana meditation for a process of like eroding our fixation on duality, our dualistic thinking and clinging. So Vipassana erodes that, and then from what we call meditation, eroding ego clinging or dualistic fixation, then we can arrive at emptiness. So, I mean, some people do call that meditating on emptiness. It's like semantics, right? I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but some people might call that meditating on emptiness. But really, what you're doing is you're looking at the kind of duality and eroding that, and then you can land in emptiness, but there's nowhere to land. But it kind of it's difficult to say that in language. You know what I mean? In words. Emptiness is not a place. It's not a thing. So there's nothing to meditate on. There's nothing to land in, literally. But we have practices to kind of erode what's getting in the way of connecting with that non-landing, non-experience. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and there's hundreds. There's so many. So no, there's many. What we're doing are we've already been doing it. These are already Vipassana practices that can reveal emptiness. And these are just a certain type, because Vipassana just means any practice of insight meditation, and really that can be there's many in Buddhism, and then of course just there's things that also exist outside of Buddhism. It's like anything that would help us to crash through and break through our dualistic clinging, right? Anything, really anything. But in Buddhism, we have very structured systems for this. So I just want to say, yeah, it's kind of like more the deep end of the pool. So it just takes
Oh, yeah.
time.
With cement flippers.
Yeah. Yeah. So just even briefly right now, if we just kind of settle our awareness and just sort of let be for a moment, and then turn that awareness to just look at mind. First of all, in Buddhism, it's a big question, what is mind? But let's just look at the mechanisms of mind, namely thought and thinking. Just watch thought and thinking. And don't do anything with it. That's kind of one of the key principles here. Look at the mind and don't do anything with it. Just look. As I said earlier, of course, we have the challenge of getting caught in thinking. Just refresh the practice and that happens. Look again. One other element to Vipassana meditation, whether it's analytical or non-analytical, is looking and resting. So we're looking here. From time to time, you need to just rest the mind back in awareness itself. You kind of let go of the looking and just rest. And as we progress, we're going to look and not find. So when we look and not find, you rest and not finding. But not finding is an experience you're going to have to come to your own conclusion about. It's not something that we can conceptually arrive at, meaning through thinking about it. Just watch mind, watch thinking, watch thought. Within the space, within the gap, within not finding, you rest. And of course, you're going to think again, go back to looking. Okay, stop there. How was it? I know it's very short. But more questions about the process. Maybe that's what we can refine here. How do you do this? What's the process? Make sure you understand.
I'm a little muddled in the process.
Yeah.
Because
So the process is we use awareness to look at mind, which is really hard. So it's probably going to be muddled for a while because it's a really difficult thing to do.
so what I get muddled with, and I get it, is where is it?
Whereas mind,
Right, where is mind?
I
It's
don't know.
not right.
Yeah, you have to just
Yeah.
look at mind, and mind is many things, but initially we're just talking about the expression of mind as thinking and thought, right? So you look towards that experience. So you're thinking of looking at something physical. It's not something physical.
No.
Here we're looking with mind at mind.
About the
Mind and
concept of mind.
like do you have any thoughts running through your head right now? Just look at them. Just really nakedly. You don't have to overthink it. Just look directly at thought. Don't think thought, look at thought. Be aware. Another way to say it is be aware of thought. Looking is just another way to say awareness. So that is the first step. That's quite challenging in and of itself. So you might just have to work with that for a while, right? And then we're just simply bearing witness to thought. Remember how we did that with the body and we did that with feeling tone? It's the same. It's just now the object is changing, right? The object is changing to what makes up mind, which is thinking, knowing, awareness, and a quality called clarity. But we're not going to talk about clarity today. Yeah. And so you just watch and you allow awareness to bear witness to that, which again is challenging because usually we get caught in that very easily. So this takes some practice. Yeah. That's why we generally like work with the first two a little bit more because it creates the stability to work with the third and fourth one. But eventually you learn to alternate looking or awareing and resting, awareing and resting. And so eventually we're not going to be able to find thought as a thing. When that experience develops, then you just rest in that experience. So remember how I said emptiness meditation is the practice of eroding our dualistic clinging. That's what I mean. And our dualistic clinging is very subtle, kind of underneath everything. So this is just something that takes a lot of time. And then also sometimes we alternate this kind of meditation with analytical meditation on emptiness. You find a lot of that in Tibetan Buddhism because that's through studying emptiness, using logical inference to sort of negate what reality isn't, and then we can go that way. So these are all just different ways to meditate on emptiness, as I said, yeah. But you could use any of the four foundations. I'm just kind of using this one to represent the doorway into emptiness, but really it can be any of them. Yeah. Anything else in process? I'm just going over it very briefly because really the first two are our main practice. This would be kind of like later down the road. Great. So the fourth foundation it's taught in different ways in different Buddhist traditions. In the Theravada, actually, this is where you do a lot of kind of investigation work. It's a little bit more experiential than that. Kind of like experiential investigation of the Four Noble Truths, the hindrances to meditation, all you can do like the 12 interdependent links. So in the Theravada, they actually kind of go more into the topics of Dharma here, where in the Tibetan Buddhist approach, you just go into the same process we've been doing, but now you're watching or being aware of all phenomena. So it includes the first three and then scopes out into all perception, like all sense perception. We're bearing witness to mind, feeling tone, body, all of it's included. And we simply just watch experience. So to me, this is kind of like a practice I do as much as possible throughout the day. It's just, as I said earlier, each of these are like a piece of life if we're to think of it that way. Like we're bearing witness to life as the body and breath, life as feeling and emotion, feeling tone, life as mind, right? We just did a taste of. And now the fourth one is just life, period. Right? So we're aware, we're awareing as a verb, or we're bearing witness to, I'm just using these synonymously, um, life. Right? So normally we don't do that. Normally we mistake ourselves to be life. Here we're aware life is happening. And of course we're in life and we're doing it, but there's a meta cognitive, it's not a great way to say it, but there's like a meta awareness happening. So this does take quite a stable awareness. That's why shamatha is very important, because we stabilize. So again, shamatha is not just settling the mind, it's also stabilizing awareness. And then when we're applying it to this kind of vipassana, we're able to not only connect with awareness and sustain it, but actually like host life. So I'd like to really emphasize that this is about hosting life. But within hosting life, we can also start to have insight and eventually realization into these four seals. Because the four seals are not about attaining something, they're about removing what life isn't and actually allowing ourselves to be with reality as it is. Right? It's a really different way to think, especially on the Buddhist path, because there's so much talk of like, get this, don't do that, attain this. This is very another way to think of it. We're just removing what is not congruent with reality through vipassana. It's a whole nother way to think of it, right? So this also connects, just as I've been connecting the four seals to the four foundations, the seal of nirvana in the Mahayana tradition could connect to this. And this is an interesting one. So the fourth seal is really like, you can interpret it in a few different ways. One is like nirvana's peace, or I prefer nirvana's beyond peace. So, this is where again it's sort of like the emptiness teachings get scoped out even wider, right? Because nirvana, and here you can interpret nirvana as like the liberation experience within the Sravakayana or Hinayana, but here really in the Mahayana implies enlightenment, Buddhahood, right? So we can just say Buddhahood. And it is the full raw, no barriers, no obstacles experience of reality and being. I don't know, this is a little bit my own thinking lately, so take this with a grain of salt, because you don't like see this in classical Buddhist teachings. I was just thinking, like, if we're not thinking of Buddhahood as attainment, we're thinking of, even though it is technically, but we're thinking of it more in the lines of what I'm saying, where it's like everything that is not in line with reality has been completely removed. And then, so the word Sangye in Tibetan, which represents Buddha, it has these two elements: san, which is like what removes, like all the things that are cleared or purified, and then ge, which is all the things that are accomplished. But it's through the removal that everything gets accomplished, like the powers of an enlightened being, of what Buddhahood is, the ability to benefit others, the incredible omniscience that comes with that, right? Like we often call those the powers or the result of Buddhahood, but those are possible because of it's the ge part of Sangye. That's possible because of the first part of the word, san, which is the removal of all obscurations, the purification of everything. So Vipassana, we can see, is essentially it's removing all obscurations that allows the expression of Buddhahood to happen. So in a way, Buddhahood is the most natural way to be. Like if we think of it in a totally different way, enlightenment from a Buddhist perspective, yes, it is something we can attain or do attain if we pursue it, but it's more the removal of everything that's not in line with reality, completely 100%. And I really like that because it's thinking of it in a really different way, which is like we're not becoming something, we're actually removing what's in the way of being our nature. Hence the word Buddha nature, right? Awakened nature. But I know this is the real deep end of the pool. That's why I waited till the end, and we're not spending a ton of time on it. But I just want to throw this out there because it really can change how we interact with the Buddhist path and inspire us in some new ways. Um, so so the fourth seal is related to this. Nirvana's peace, or nirvana's beyond peace. Beyond is this element of like peace is a concept, and when peace exists as a concept, war or conflict exists as a concept. For a Buddha, they don't have the concept of peace and war anymore. I mean, they can see our concept of it and they can work with it and help, but they don't have that dualistic concept anymore. And so nirvana itself is even beyond nirvana. so so sometimes at this point we start to talk about the unity of samsara and nirvana, which is a little bit more of a tantric term, but or tantric subject, but it exists in the Mahayana too, and it's a very profound teaching because this whole time we're being taught and working with our prison, and that we need to find the key to get out, only to realize the prison was never a prison, and that is Buddha. See? So very, I don't know. I mean, I have no experience of that, to be clear. It's just a concept from study that I'm sharing with you. But it's so inspiring for me. Like that is so inspiring. That my prison is not a prison. I'm just seeing it as a prison. And through the path, through all this practice we're talking about, what is the result of the practice? The result is realizing there was nothing to practice and at the end of the day. And actually, all that's happening is we're removing a giant veil covering how reality actually is, you know? And then a Buddha is able to, they are that, but they're not just the reality. There's still enlightened mind, in the form of Dharmakaya. And then it can express itself in Sambhogakaya and Nirmanakaya, these different form bodies that emanate for the benefit of others. So it's a very beautiful thing, this teaching on the unity of samsara and nirvana, right? Because it's saying ultimately there's nothing to transcend. Yet we need to work the path to realize that. So there's almost this carrot on a stick, because it's not, if we just sit around and do nothing, that's not useful, right? We're just going to be stuck in our obscurations. So this is really the fourth seal. And how do we realize this seal? Through the first three, right? Impermanence, dukkha, and emptiness. But really, this is the culmination of the teachings on emptiness. And so maybe we'll just, for a few minutes again, we'll do some of the fourth foundation, and then we'll kind of leave some time for chatting at the end here. But again, now you see how each of the foundations is getting more and more subtle too, right? Now it's the most subtle. Just be. Don't close your eyes. Don't do nothing. Don't block anything. Don't shut off anything. Don't try to stop your thoughts. Don't try to think. Just sit and be with awareness. That's key, with awareness. But also don't try to do awareness. That's another problem. There's no object to look at. There's no object to be aware of, just awareness and life as it is right now. Okay. So I recommend that for very short periods, right? And then I recommend integrating that with your daily life as much as you can when you have the capacity of awareness. So that's why meditating with the eyes open is very helpful at this point. Because then I mean, fully open. Because then when we're walking around and stuff, we're used to that. We're used to using our eyes and gaze, where the gaze can just be relaxed. We can still see things and react to them, but we're hosting our life with awareness, right? So over time, again, these are very subtle practices, but over time, there's more insight that can happen, right? And insight, really, insight into the nature of reality, or insight into these three or four seals, it's subtle and kind of obscure in the beginning, and then it starts to grow and be more prominent the more we practice. But also, it's not conceptual insight. By not conceptual, I mean we're not thinking about it. So there's not a conceptual idea we're going to land in. It's just the shifting and transformation of our experience, and that's where the magic happens. But that's also, in the beginning, can be confusing, because it's sort of like, how do we know we're moving in the right direction, or how do we know we're having insight? That can be tricky. So I think my main advice is, don't worry too much about that. Just practice. What I usually tell people is, get really clear about the process of each practice, not the result. So if we get clear about what we're doing, and sometimes the problem is the what we're doing can be unclear until we start doing it, and then that can get more clear as we do it more. But either way, focus on process. Don't worry too much about outcome. And then over some time, you kind of check, and you can, this is why studying the Dharma is really helpful, because we can kind of compare it against the teachings and see what's happening, especially in relation to our afflictive emotions. Really, what we're trying to affect, right now, is our relationship to reaction and afflictive emotion, right? So our reactions usually are coming from clinging and aversion and different forms of that. So we're trying to work with that and affect that. Aversion first for most of us, because it's easier a little bit. Clinging is pretty difficult. Yeah. But yeah, that's about it. I'd love to hear from you. I know we went kind of pretty far into the deep end at the end there, but if there's any questions from that, I mean, I love talking about that. So I'm curious. Well, thanks.
I just have a comment. Had a little aha moment. I've never had any discussion on nirvana, and so when you said realizing that there's nothing to practice, and that you're just removing everything, it connected the diamond in the rough and covered in mud. That just finally clicked. I now get that. So thank you for the aha
Cool.
moment.
You're welcome. I mean, you did it. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, because those metaphors are really powerful. Lotus in the mud, Buddha covered in, gold Buddha statue covered in a dirty rag, gold underneath the how do you say it, the dross. There's all kinds of beautiful metaphors in the sutras, and yeah, exactly. It's sort of like, that's why they're there, because these are tough things to cognize, because they're yeah, it's just like our mind sees impurity. The samsaric mind, that's why samsara is circular. It's like, things are impure because we see impure, then they're impure again, and then we see them. You see what I'm saying? So it's just this kind of circle. But yeah, a lot of the teachings are to get us to kind of out of that. But then, of course, we need to experience that through meditation eventually. Wonderful.
I know we're almost that time and you scoot. Do you have any suggestions for, I mean, you've been talking about the practice, but anything else to read, look at? I mean, to take us sort of from this amazing
On the four
class.
foundations specifically, or
Yeah, or anything. I mean, I wrote down the handshake thing, but I mean, anything else that you would
yeah.
recommend?
I mean, there's so much. That's the issue. Often people ask me this, and I'm sometimes at a loss, because we have systems which you all are kind of connected to. So I would just say that first, keep connecting to the system, meaning, like, you know, because there's so much to study, reflect, and meditate on. we have to do it systematically. And so having connection to a Buddhist lineage is very helpful because they have prescriptions for how to do that, right? So I would say just continue that journey. And then, yeah, there's some books. There's a really cool book called The Joy of Wisdom by Mingyur Rinpoche. That's a pretty nice book. Um, just for like kind of what I'm looking for is like kind of catch-alls that kind of cover a lot of territory. Also, he has a really nice book on his 4-year wandering retreat called In Love with the World. That's a really nice book, and it's like it's story and Dharma teaching together, which is pretty cool. Um, Aside from that, anything else would be kind of like very specific, right? Emptiness study is just sort of ongoing, usually requires a teacher and things like that. But there's the Dalai Lama's commentary on the Heart Sutra is quite good. Just called the Heart Sutra, I believe. Yeah. And then I was going to leave you all with, I got a course coming up as well. You all are welcome to join. I run my own courses through my website. So I'll put the link here. It's actually going to be on, the title is Nurturing Compassion, but it's actually going to be a little bit more on the unification of compassion and wisdom. So both on compassion and emptiness, and kind of, the thread I shared with you all today, even though it was through the mechanism of the four foundations, it's kind of a thread I share a lot. Embodiment, working with feeling world compassionately, opening up to non-dual wisdom, these kinds of things. Yeah. But just put it in the chat. You can click on the link if you want. Is that enough resources for now?
I guess. Thank you.
I mean, it's really never enough. There's just, as you know, there's so much to, I think finding our way, the trickiest thing I think is feeling confident enough to focus on a few different practices and perspectives. And then it's sort of like we need to get to a place in our study of the Dharma where we don't understand everything, but we understand the scaffolding. Like I tend to focus a lot on scaffolding because once that's there, we don't know every piece within the scaffolding, but we kind of know where it fits and know the kind of overall purpose of where things are going. And that can remedy a lot of confusion when we're trying to navigate this path. So that's why today I focused a lot on the Four Seals and kind of how they're not different things. They're just unfolding the confusion of what keeps us stuck, basically, in dukkha. But I think fundamentally, that's what Buddhism is doing. And when we understand that, we can start to, make the scaffolding a little more complicated and then fill it in. And then, there's always different techniques, there's always different practices, but the foundations are that. Their purpose is to do that. And presented through the Four Seals, you can see the purpose is to see that samsara and nirvana are not two different things, essentially. But once we've seen that, I mean, if we see that directly, we're a Buddha. I mean, that's, yeah. Yeah. Samantha, anything? Yeah, any mind before we wrap up too? No, good. Well, thanks everyone. I really enjoyed this, and I hope it was useful for you. And yeah, feel free to reach out anytime. Like I said, I got a lot of resources on my website. So through that link, you can also just check out the rest of my website and sign up for my newsletter if you want. The benefit to that is I mostly just share events coming up, and then I share what do you call it? Like my regular content. So you don't have to go searching on YouTube or anything. I just share kind of what I've been doing lately. And then also you get some guided meditations when you sign up. So there's some other guided meditations that if you like guided meditations, you can use those. Yeah. Maybe we'll
Thank
dedicate.
you so much. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah. This is my favorite thing to do, sharing the Dharma. So and you guys are great. I was a little worried we're a small group, but you guys are really enthusiastic. So you really filled it in. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Your energy too. Yeah. Makes me want to teach more. So that's great. So we'll dedicate the merit. Yeah. Sonam di tamshe zepani tonen nipen ranam tamshen pegan nachi balam chupai sipe solen jovan. By this merit, the omniscience be attained, may the adversary clutches be conquered. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, may all sentient beings be freed. Sancho, Sancho, Rinpoche, Maken, Parnam, Higuchi, Kappa, Nyampa, Nepal, Gone, Gondo, Power, Show. The precious bodhicitta that has not arisen arise, and may that which has arisen continue. Thanks so much, everyone. Feel free to reach out anytime. Yeah, it's wonderful to sit with you today.